evening, wherever you are in the world, to this second episode about introverts. And I'm very, very lucky to have the lovely Jules Carter here from Pure Voice Life Coaching. I'll correct that correct. And you take people from career stuck to career success through clever communication. So first and foremost, thank you very much for being here with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking me.
You're very welcome. And Jules and I have known each other for years. We actually met 2009. We were just working out a coaching group, but you've been qualified as a coach since the 2001 time. And so you've been doing it for years. And but you very kindly said you'd come and share your experience because you're a bit like me. You externalize, but you're also an introvert. So it's interesting to just talk about the introvert world, but particularly you have a passion and an interest and a curiosity around leadership and the importance of listening to introverts. And so that's why today's episode is all about the importance of listening to introverts. So let's start, first of all, is what is your definition and understanding of introvert? Because I think this is one of the areas that can be grey. So let's start with that one first.
I like to think of it from the energy point of view. There are lots of definitions out there, but from an energetic point of view, I can cope with people, but in short bursts. And what actually makes me feel alive is when I'm doing things more solar. So writing, reading, that kind of thing, which shocks people because I've got a history of performance. And people always imagine that a performer is really out there and really extrovert, but actually what I normally do is reflect back how I see the world, which is quite an introvert trait as well.
Fabulous. Well, that bit about reflecting back how you see the world is new to me because I remember people, because I talk a lot, natural talker, trained listener, and people assume because I'm chatty and I talk that I'm an extrovert and I get my energy from people. So this has always been a bit, and I remember saying once in a training session, I think I must be an introverted extrovert because it's like trying to fit to these things because I'm like, I do need to be with people and I make sense of the world through communication and conversation. But if it was all about energy, I absolutely have a limit. Now, I am a bit curious how much of that is because being more introverted, like socially, I've really struggled in the pandemic because I've realized that my social life is very much about sitting and just watching. But if family wants to get on the phone on Zoom and chat to you, it's not the same as going to the pub and just watching the world go by while everybody else gets on with it. It's not the same as going to a family party and offering to do the dishes quietly in the kitchen, just keeping yourself to yourself, or just sitting and observing the world. When you get on Zoom, people kind of want you to talk and engage. And I was just like, nah, can't do it. And I think that's when I became more aware in this pandemic of my introverted tendency, that I needed to withdraw. I needed space on my own to regroup and to organize. So tell me about this, because one of the conversations we talked about is this. It seems to be that people think the extroverted way is the right way to be, and therefore the introverts just need to get a little bit more. They assume that not wanting to or not needing to talk is a representation of lack of confidence, a lack of engagement, that all that kind of stuff. And so that we have this paradigm where people think, well, everyone's got to. Let's just be clear, guys, whoever's watching this, if everyone started getting extrovert and everyone started talking, who would be listening?
Me.
Because that if the whole world became these extroverts, it would be, gosh, wouldn't it be noisy? It would be noisy. So tell me about your experience, because that's what we're here for, is this thing about there's two sections, wasn't there? There's the importance of listening to introverts, but also this thing about where does it come from that you have to teach introverts to be more extroverted? So tell me about what your experience.
I think you hit the nail on the head. People think introvert means lack of confidence because introverts are often shy. And I personally think that goes to school. My son's in a Danish nursery and they approach things a lot differently than they do in the UK. My son is allowed downtime. if he wants to disappear and play off on his own, he's praised for it. Whereas if I did that when I was his age, I would be told I was being standoffish, or I was not a very good mixer.
Yeah.
Whereas they recognise him more the purpose of downtime. And my son is a little bit of an extrovert, I have to say. He is very energized by being around his friends, completely the opposite of his father and myself. So watching him be nurtured for wanting his downtime is really good, because I think that will help him not be shy.
Do you think that's because, though, that you, by nature and because of your training and the skills you've got, you can honour him, whether he's extroverted or introverted behaviour is being accepted? Therefore, it isn't a, I think there's definitely something about this deeming it right or wrong, isn't it? That it's, you know, one's good or one's bad.
Yeah.
And therefore, is it that introverted people become shy and reserved about speaking because they will get corrected or encouraged to speak faster, think faster, come up with things? Therefore, who they are, who's being presented, isn't accepted. So the shyness isn't a result or a trait of introvertness. It's a result of being criticised or corrected or changed for being who you are in the first place. Would that be your sort of...
Absolutely. In school, I even put my school reports online because people couldn't believe I was quiet and shy. I got to university and I realised if I wanted to get on and have the career I wanted, I could not be the person who sat back and watched. So I trained myself to perform. I was the class champion at seminars because I'd stand up there and I'd confidently shout it all out. Then I'd go and sit at the back and I would miss the next person because I would be so much in my own head regrouping. And the more I did it, the better I got at it and the less time I needed to recover. But it was definitely something I had to learn to do. And there is a saying that magic happens when your desire for it is greater than your fear. That is exactly what happened. My fear of being out there was dwarfed by wanting to do well in my degree. And the only way I could, and part of my degree grade was actually a seminar presentation.
Right. And so that brings up for me, because I call myself an introverted extrovert because I don't feel like I fit into the thing. And I'm actually wondering whether I am actually an introvert, because somebody laughed once going, of course you're an extrovert. And I think perhaps I am, but because I got criticised for talking too much, too fast, too often, I lost confidence. So therefore, when I was with people, it was energetically, it was exhausting because I was constantly having to adapt and trying to work out how I needed to be for everybody else to be okay with me, rather than me just being myself. And then people would say, oh, be yourself. And you go, so you'd be yourself. And then they go, oh, stop talking. Or you'd ask a question. They say, don't ask so many questions. You think, you've just said be myself. Which one of me did you want today then? Because, you know, I can
want the self that they think you are, not what you actually are. And they're two different things.
Yeah, or the one that they need in that moment. They've seen an aspect of you that they liked. And I think what they're really saying is don't bring the self-doubting part of you here. Just bring someone who's accepting of yourself. It's the criticising yourself and not being sure. But I don't think they're always aware that they're part of that process by saying, be yourself. They've inferred you weren't in the first place. Well, how can you not be yourself? You know, I am somebody who will doubt myself if I think that's me being me. Like if I think it's going to...
Which facet? Because we are multifaceted. And it's not about playing a part either. People bring out different bits of us. I become much more nurturing around some people. And I become much more comedic around others. And much quieter around others, and they're all parts of me. It's just the one that clicks.
I want to find that group where I can be the comedian again, because I think I'm really funny. Just not everybody appreciates it. But I know that she's there and she wants to come out. So what I'm hearing is, obviously there's this, I think that what we're saying is that it's the labels introvert and extrovert come from where you get your energy from. And I think they get confused with people who externally process to make sense of the world, to work out their thinking, and people who internally process, so they need time to think it through in their head. And so I want to talk about that a bit, because we've talked about it. So what's your take on this sort of internal, external processing is in relation to introverts? You know,
mine's totally external. I journal for that reason, because if I said it aloud to anyone, I'd probably end up in a hospital somewhere, not of my choosing. And I talk to my dog. My dog, I process a lot by talking to my dog, because it allows me to say things without it being a burden on somebody else. But I do need that to put it out there to process.
So that's yeah,
which is extrovert. But in psychology, you talk about people being reflectors and deflectors,
right?
And it's a typical deflection trait, which is often confused with extroverts, because they do often go hand in hand, but not necessarily so.
So what would you hear and see that would tell you it's a deflecting? I can't remember what you called it now.
If it's deflecting behaviour, it's where you process things by putting it out in the world. So you do actually need some feedback to take.
That was the bit that was coming for me. That was when you were saying that. What was coming up for me is that I do talk to myself a lot, and that can be where I just want to practice the speech, get it clear in my head, make it so it becomes sort of the muscle memory is remembered. So that's a repetition thing. And I have done journaling, but there is something that happens when I speak to a human being and I tell them what's happening, and I've realized without the facial expressions, the feedback, it kind of doesn't complete the loop. It doesn't complete the making sense of it. And so, and you just said about the being in hospital thing, you know, be put into a mental hospital for what you're saying and thinking. And that's been one of my binds in life, is because I need to get it out, but it's only a temporary thought. It's not a defining thing, and I'm not going to act on it. It's just a bit like this right now. And if I hadn't had the listeners in my world that could listen to me and then just let it go.
It's a moment. It's an energetic moment.
It's an imagination.
Yeah.
I'm making it up, and it feels like I'm going to jump off a building, but I'm not going to really. It's just a language for describing my experience in this moment. So, okay. So I think hopefully
you've practiced clean language. You realise the importance of it being a metaphor for that moment.
Yes.
And it being temporary, and it can be behind you as quickly as it can be in front of you. But I think unless people have done something that unphysical, it's hard to appreciate.
Yeah, and there's something as well about that temporary bit. I listened to Peter Taylor and years ago, and I remember him saying to me about emotions are temporary and transient, and they will pass. And one of my reasons I didn't speak up, even though I knew it helped me to talk it out, was because people would hang on to those first few words, and they would hold on to them like that's the truth. And then I'd get some feedback from them, and I'd go, oh no, actually that's not right. And they go, well then you lied, but you just said. And I'm like, no, that's a moment. That was me trying to make sense of it. And so I was building it in my head, and I thought it was going to be a castle, and then you've said something, and I go, no, it's a rocket. Do you know? And it's people being forgiving and accepting that we don't say the truth when we're processing. I do want to mention one other thing about introverts, extrovert, and this internal, external processing, because I know that my introvert, when this thing about not being shy, it took me a long time as a coach and as a decent human being, I put my hands up, to be okay with when I ask somebody something and they go, I need time to process, because I want to know, now. And I still have to take a deep breath, because as I'm saying it out loud, I'll get rid of this rule, because I've just realized there's a bit of a rule of they don't trust me to say what they're really thinking. They're not telling me what's going on. But I've realized, and it's taken a while to work it out, that when someone asks me a question, I take ages to get to the answer. I just talk all the way to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the judgment was it's taking too long to get the information, but really what the reality was is I've been that person when I'm nattering a bit like I'm doing with you now, and I have to let the person know, don't worry, you don't have to remember any of this. I'm just unpacking my files trying to find you the answer. I haven't even got there yet. And it was when I realized as an external processor that I take a long time to produce the answer, or if not longer sometimes, than the internal processor, that I had more compassion to just hold that space, or simply leave them for 20 minutes, or say, should we come back to this tomorrow, or just to let it go and have that response later. So
you also process things consciously. Some people need to do it without their filters, because their filters are so well developed that they stop them straight away.
Yeah. So tell me a bit more about filters, because some of our viewers might not know what we mean by filters. So tell me what you mean by filters.
The information comes from the world and comes into our brains, and we put all our experience and our beliefs into that to make sense of it. These filters can either be used to protect us or to help us perform better. And when they're trying to protect us, sometimes our filters say that's not relevant, when really it is. And if you're talking about it, you'll say, well, I don't think that applies to me, but there was this one time, and then this happened, and this happened. And then all of a sudden you realize this is a really relevant filter. Some people have to do that without being aware of it, because the next filter will come down and say, I told you it really wasn't relevant. And then they get angry with themselves, or they completely deflect it to somewhere completely that isn't relevant, and avoid the issue that they really, really, really desperately need to put out there. So some people do need, particularly, I've worked a little bit with people who have been traumatized, and that is something that they really need to do, is to let that happen without any conscious thought whatsoever. And again, it comes back to these people are often thought of as introverts, and they're not.
Yeah, and
it's just
it's so
scared.
liberating, though, isn't it, when you can speak your truth in the moment, knowing that the person who's listening, one, has the resources, the skill, and the ability to hear it without it negatively impacting them, and two, let it go, because sometimes just the expulsion of it is all that releases it, and it's gone. So what was a big thing in the moment, once it's heard and honored and witnessed once, is it's done and dusted it, and it's off, it's sorted, it's cleared, just because the honoring of it was all that was needed for it to shift or to change or transform in some way,
or for it to be real.
Well, yeah,
sometimes it's not real until you say it, and the impacts of it are very real, but the actual it isn't real. And then when you say it, all the things that have happened as a result of it make sense. Instead of them being crazy or something that's bad, all of a sudden there's a reason for it, and then that's okay.
That's reminded me, because I've heard people say, I can't say it because it will make it real, and I've never really thought about that expression before. And I think that my struggle was probably more to do with the fact that everything was real, even if it's in my head or not. And it was almost like I assumed everybody could see and hear all that was going on. And it was only when someone said, it wasn't, we're talking like weeks ago, someone said, as long as you don't act on the thoughts, it's okay. And I was like, oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. And so it's just, so that's something we didn't know we were going to come across in this conversation. But that's a really good point, isn't it? It's about what's our filter, what's our perception or our experience or our model of when you say it, when you talk out loud, what happens? So does it make it real? Whereas for me, I'm just thinking what happens. I think it's quite real, really real inside. But when it comes out, depending on how it's received, will depend on if it's honoured, it tends to just dissipate. It goes, and I can let it go. If it's rejected or reacted upon, that's when it sort of comes back in an implosion, and then I'm kind of like, don't know what to do with it then. So it's like, where do I take this now? And that's why I'm very grateful to have my safe communities to talk to now. Otherwise I'd be stuck with an awful lot of stuff inside.
Is that because you feel that you have to do something about their reaction?
So firstly, I think I need to say that that's probably an old model. It's not a current model, but that's how I was doing feedback before. So I think there was a sense, probably from a very young age, that I felt responsible for, that if me being me caused somebody else pain, discomfort, unhappy. I've now realised that giving birth, change are all quite uncomfortable and they cause pain, and that sometimes me being me and doing something can make someone go, oh my gosh. It might be the wake-up call they needed in their life, and it's fine and it's all okay, as long as I didn't do it with any contempt to cause pain. If I can hand on heart say that I was just sharing my experience, but without any kind of awareness of what might be this person is. I saw a lovely thing actually yesterday, which I haven't thought of it, but they've put on it mental health warning, and then they've put a massive loads of gaps before they start the post about suicide. And I was like, well, that's okay, but I don't know what that's going to be anyway. But at least I've had some kind of pre-warning that I'm choosing to read this, and I can sort of like prepare myself. So I think that's so I do have some sense of responsibility that if I'm going to, Brené Brown talks about your shame story and says, you should only tell your shame story to people who've earned the right to hear it. But I also think there's a responsibility to tell your shame story to people who are resourced to hear it. So I think it's just a checking in. You don't know. We just talked earlier about an incident where perhaps we wouldn't do coaching because we're not resourced to have those coaching conversations. And so I think that there is, from a listening point of view, I've become mindful of just checking with people. Are you in a good place right now to hear some stuff? Because I just need to get this out of my system, and being okay with the fact that they may not be, and it's okay for them to say no, and that I go and choose somebody else. Now, I can't say that I'm always with my husband's probably the worst one, where it just comes out. He doesn't get any requests always. It's just like it'll be there. Everybody else, I seem to have this ability to have a control of sort of saying, are you in a good place for this? Now, we've got a couple of minutes left, and one of the things we wanted to talk about was the importance of listening to introverts. So tell me a little bit more about, where's that coming from? What's that thought belief around?
I think very often, having worked in quite male-dominated environments, you do see the quieter people are not listened to, and very often it's their insight, because they've not been part of the noise, that holds the key to what needs to happen, because the insight of the loud people is already out there. It's the culture, it's there, and it's back to this balance again. We seem to be losing our ability to have the middle ground. Introverts are bad, extroverts are good. None of us are 100% introvert or extrovert, by the way. It's a sliding scale. And that also means that very often we don't appreciate that there's two sides to a pancake. And we see the one side of the pancake, which is, we've got to go out there, we've got to go, and we've got to nail it. And we don't turn it over and they say, well, do you realise you've just stepped over your first client? In trying to nail it, you've just stepped over your very first
opportunity.
Wrong. Yeah.
And that reminds me of a story where I was working with a team, and the CEO was extrovert, and his story that he made up was that when the introverts weren't talking, that they weren't adding any value, and he felt that they weren't putting stuff in. And when we unpacked that and sort of just asked the people that hadn't contributed yet what was happening for you, it was like, well, what I was thinking has already been said, so I don't need to take up airtime to repeat what's already been said. And so then we checked in with the people who had basically verbalized and said, I agree with what's been said. And they basically say the same thing over again, but now they've had a voice. So there's definitely this thing, there's a lot of stories I think we make up in terms of, I call it the critic. There's a story that we make up, there's an inference that we have about what talking or not talking means. And I know for me personally, I have a strong desire to hear, and you've got, you know, the voice there. I want to hear what people have got to say. And I guess what we want to leave it with is that I think we need to take time to find out what works best for them, to set them up for success. They have to know that when they speak, that their stuff's going to be honoured and how the information is going to be used if you want them to speak up. You might need to give them heads up on questions the night before if you suddenly want them to bring stuff. Not everybody processes in the moment. Yeah. And those of who like me, I will answer the question properly. I'll answer the question, instantly, but I'd answer it properly the next day, because I can sometimes just give an answer, but it's only when I sleep on it I go, oh, actually, there's another way of doing this. And so I wonder whether it's more to do with pace and speed. And, you know, this fast pace of life is that we're not giving ourselves, even the extroverts or the external processors, are not giving people time for things to land and process and percolate before they have the answers, before they respond in some way. So let's leave it with, so if you were saying it's important we listen to the introverts, what kind of listen would that be? You know, from an introvert perspective, you're an introvert. What works for you to be listened to? What kind of listening works for you?
I think what people forget is you're the eyes and ears. So you see things that are in between. So you do kind of see the next level down. You can see people who are in pain. You can see the emotion that runs around it. And I think letting people talk in that way so that they can talk about what they see, what they feel is happening, not just the cold, hard facts.
So what I'm hearing for you as an introvert, you can see deeper down, and it's you can see the people that are in pain, and what you'd like to have happen is for people to give you that space to share what you're observing rather than the hard facts. And so those that are watching the video and on playback, if you class yourself as an introvert, I'd love to know what kind of listening you would want, because I'm interested whether all introverts, because I think my husband's an introvert, an internal processor, but I don't know that he had observed the different levels. So I'm just wondering, again, like all these labels, do we get to a point where we're generalizing? And so it'd be great for discussion to put on the bottom, as an introvert, what kind of listening works for you? And let's find out, as an introvert who's listening and not speaking, that's like what for you? What's your experience of it?
I think all introverts see things deeply, but just deeply in a different way. So for me, I see things deeply in a feeling way because I'm very kinesthetic. But I also know my husband sees things, and he's a much more analytical and much more of a slow processor than I am. And he will see things in numbers almost and probabilities. So he will see things in a very different way, but it's the same process of you know, not having to respond to something straight away, so you get that extra layer of thought. And I think, again, lots of introverts will see things from a slightly different perspective, depending on what their primary driver is in their modality.
I definitely think we need to, I think the way for us to understand, though, for us as external processors, because even though I'm not an extrovert, I talk to think, I've had to learn to breathe and leave space for the internal processor or the introvert to have a space to talk, otherwise I'll just fill it up. So I've learned, you know, I'm a natural talker, trained listener, I've learned to create that space for people. But also by talking to them and finding out what works for them, you can come up with strategies, can't you? Because I know for my husband, he says in conversation, we'll start talking about something and he'll come up with an answer. By the time he's actually got something to engage in the conversation, it's moved on.
Oh, that happens all the time.
So, well, one of the things that he worked out, and I said to him, well, here's the thing, right? As an external processor, if you want to go back and start a conversation again, I'll be like that, back to it. I don't have to think about it ages. It will just ignite really quickly. So I said, so he has this catchphrase now, can we just go back to it? I've got something I'd like to add to that. And so we'll go back and we'll revisit a conversation. But again, I think in a business setting, that kind of thing would be like, oh, we've already discussed that, we've moved on. It's like, well, no, because I haven't had my voice. I haven't. So I think there's some strategies, isn't it, for the, allow people to go back.
This is one of the things I teach people when I'm working with people who don't speak out, and they often feel that they've come back. If you can move it even further forward to bring it back to that point, and it's a very clever way of taking things back without looking like you're hanging on to something.
We're going to run over time on our thing, but I want to have this strategy. So come on, tell me about it. Tell me more. How does this work?
What it means basically is you extrapolate so far in the future that the bit that you want to bring out has manifest. So then you can take it back. So
can you give me an actual example? Because I'm not sure that I get that.
In a sales office, you need to hit your sales figures. You're launching a product. So who will buy that product? That's what you have come up with, the idea after the targeting has already been established. And you know that their targeting market is missing a big chunk. So rather than just say, can we go back to the targeting market and look at this again? Or, oh, I've just thought of somebody else. What you could then say is, when we've exhausted that market, who do we look at? Could we look at maybe teenagers or whatever the group is? Because what you've done is taken it forward, which helps the extroverts who are very forward thinking to get in with it. And you've stopped yourself from looking like you're dragging everything back and saying, oh, we need to revisit this. Yeah. Because time is the thing that people worry about. And if you keep dragging people back, people worry they won't go forward. But if you take people forward to bring them back, you've removed that fear.
Yeah. So I think though that comes back to a little bit though, you're training an introvert to be more extroverted, i.e. go forward thinking. And so what I want to put out to the viewers is that's a great strategy. And yes, and all of these things in life, you go and try them, you get feedback, you see if they work. But I also want to just put a shout out to the extroverts in the world, people who externally process who, so from that perspective, I'm quite a forward thinker, and I do get that, oh, we're going back over stuff. And through the process of coaching, through clean language, I've realized there's so much value to do that actually it doesn't have a negative impact on me now. So I just want to put it out there to the extroverts. You've got a lot to learn from introverts. You've got a lot to learn from slowing things down, stopping the talking, just noticing what's happening, observing other things, noticing where your attention goes when you stop verbalizing everything. And notice if you go back and reiterate or embed or question something, what new and really useful information comes out of it, because we can often think the reflection is a time waster, that we're going backwards, whereas there's huge value from reflecting and learning and taking the lessons. Otherwise you just keep doing the wrong thing over and over again because you don't go back over stuff. And so let's leave it on that, because I think that's the key of what we wanted to talk about. Is there seems to be a bias towards getting introverts to be more extroverted, and I really want to encourage extroverts to take from this viewing that yes, they can adapt their behavior like that, but also if we, or as the extrovert external processor, adapt ours, we can both learn from this diverseness of the differences. And so rather than being agitated when somebody does the opposite to us, so the introvert won't get frustrated because the other one goes forward and the extrovert doesn't get frustrated because the other one goes back, we go, oh, here's an opportunity to expand this learning and this experience by actually honoring the different ways that can be explored through the communication. Because I think that's when we lose confidence, when we have to keep trying to be what other people need us to be rather than being ourselves. And if we can be ourselves and people go, oh, that's really value, honor, respect it, and move from it.
That's why I've learned to step back and honor my introvert. So I recognize when I'm performing rather than when I'm actually working, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, being you.
Absolutely.
Fabulous. Well, we are at 34 minutes, and I do like to try and keep this a little bit below, usually at 25 minutes, but it's been 10. Well, that's a great example of it's been 10 minutes of extra wonderfulness. So I really thank you for having me on the show.
Thank
you for sharing your wisdom. We will put your website details in the descriptions below. If anyone wants to get hold of Jules to have some pure voice life coaching, please do so, because it's another human being that's out there that understands and that can listen to help you to do more of what you love. Thank you for joining me today, Jules.
Thank you.